My golden child brother got my fiancé pregnant and our parents chose him. 4 years later, they lost everything because of their golden child and came begging for help. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be the type of person to share my personal life on here, but I'm at a breaking point and I need to get this off my chest. I've always known that my brother Kyle, 20, male, was the golden child. Even when we were little kids, it was obvious. My parents, especially my mom, always treated him differently. If he cried because his tower of blocks fell over, mom would sit with him for an hour, hugging him and telling him he was sensitive and needed extra care. Me? I'd be told to stop being a baby and clean up my mess. I learned early on that the rules were different for him and me. Kyle was always special in their eyes. Mom said it was because he was sensitive, and Dad had all these dreams of Kyle becoming a doctor. For my dad, I think it was about living vicariously through him. Dad had always wanted to be a doctor but never made it through college. Kyle was his second shot at that dream. Meanwhile, I was just Michael. I wasn't special or sensitive. I was the kid who got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and didn't ask for much. I didn't need hand-holding like Kyle, so I got ignored. It didn't really hit me how deep it ran until high school when I got a full scholarship to study computer science. I thought finally this will be something they're proud of. I mean, who wouldn't be happy about their kid earning a full ride to college, right? When I told my parents, I still remember the exact scene. I was standing in the kitchen holding the letter. My mom glanced at it, nodded, and said, "That's nice honey, can you help Kyle with his med school applications later?" That was it. That was the extent of the praise I got for working my ass off to earn a scholarship. Kyle, meanwhile, was in high school too, barely pulling C's in biology, but you would have thought he'd cured cancer the way my mom hyped him up. It wasn't just academics though. Everything in my life felt smaller compared to Kyle's. For example, when I started dating Ashley in senior year, I was head over heels. She was my first serious relationship and she was amazing. Ashley was the kind of person who made you feel at ease just by being around her. She worked at a salon part-time while finishing high school, and even back then she had this focus on saving for the future. She was practical, smart, and cared about me a lot. But my parents? They didn't care. They didn't want to meet her. When Thanksgiving rolled around that year, I asked if Ashley could join us. Mom literally said it's just high school puppy love, don't make it a big deal. That hurt. I wanted my parents to know her, to see what I saw, but no. Ashley wasn't important enough, although every single one of Kyle's girlfriends was treated like royalty. They were always at family dinners getting slices of homemade pie while my parents would gush over them like they were already daughters-in-law. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night listening to Mom ask Kyle's girlfriend about her dreams and career plans while I was just sitting there thinking, where was this enthusiasm for Ashley? Still, Ashley and I made it work. I went to college on my scholarship while she stayed behind working at the salon and saving money. We did long distance for 2 years, weekend video calls and visits when I could make them work. We held on to each other. It wasn't easy, but we were building something. When I proposed to Ashley last summer, it felt like everything had been worth it. We were in this little park near her apartment and I'd saved up to buy her a simple but beautiful ring. She cried when I asked and we both laughed through tears because we were so damn happy. For the first time, I felt like my life was finally moving forward. To my surprise, my parents actually seemed to accept Ashley after I proposed. It was like a switch flipped in my mom's head. Suddenly Ashley was part of the family. My mom even started asking her about wedding plans and what kind of dress she wanted. At the time, I thought this was a sign that my parents were coming around, that maybe they were finally starting to see me, not just Kyle. I should have known better. Thanksgiving came around again and this time I went home excited. I had plans to tell my family about the wedding and start talking about the future, maybe even show them how well I was doing at school and with my internship. It felt like things were finally starting to align for me. Then I got the text. It was from Ashley, out of nowhere. Need to talk, Starbucks urgent. I had this sinking feeling in my gut but tried to shake it off. Maybe she was just stressed about the wedding. When I walked into that Starbucks, I'll never forget how she looked. Ashley was sitting at a little corner table holding a coffee cup with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She wouldn't look up at me. I sat down and before I could even ask what was wrong she blurted it out. "I'm pregnant, it's Kyle's." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe for a second. I thought I must have misheard her. I actually asked her to repeat it hoping I'd heard it wrong, but no, she said it again. She started crying trying to explain. She said it happened over the summer when Kyle kept showing up at her salon. He'd talk about how far away I was and how lonely she must have been. She said she didn't even know how it started, but it just happened. She kept apologizing, saying she didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't yell, I didn't get angry, I just sat there staring at her. After a minute, I stood up, grabbed my keys and walked out. I didn't say anything to her, I just left. I don't remember much of the drive back home after Ashley dropped that bomb at Starbucks. It felt like my brain had disconnected from the rest of my body. The radio was playing something, probably one of those overplayed pop songs, but it was just noise. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just felt hollow. By the time I got to my parents' house it was dark outside. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment staring at the porch light. It felt surreal, like I was about to walk into a dream where nothing made sense. I wasn't sure if I was even ready to face Kyle or my parents, but I needed answers. The second I walked into the house, I saw him. Kyle was sitting on the couch, head down, shoulders slouched. That was his signature move, head down like a kid who got caught stealing cookies. My mom was hovering around him, patting his back and handing him tissues. She wasn't crying, but she looked worried, like Kyle was the victim here. My dad was standing near the window, arms crossed, not saying a word. He looked like he was avoiding the whole thing. The tension in the room was suffocating. It felt like everyone had been waiting for me to show up, like I was the last piece of a very messed up puzzle. "What the hell is going on?" I said. My voice came out quieter than I wanted it to, but it still cut through the silence. My mom was the first to speak. "Michael, let's sit down and talk about this calmly." "Calmly?" That word set me off immediately. I didn't want calm, I wanted the truth. I wanted to know how my fiancé, the woman I'd planned a life with, ended up pregnant with my brother's kid. Don't tell me to be calm. I snapped, looking straight at Kyle. You're the one who should be talking, say something. Kyle didn't look up, he just mumbled something into his chest. What? I said louder this time, speak up. My mom jumped in like she was his lawyer. He's taking responsibility for his actions, Michael. This is a big step for him. He's going to be a father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A big step? Like this was some achievement I'm supposed to congratulate him for? I laughed, but it wasn't the funny kind of laugh. It was bitter. A father? He can't even pass a basic biology class, and now you think he's ready to be a parent? I said, looking at my dad, who still stared out the window like none of this concerned him. You have nothing to say, Dad? My dad turned to me, finally sighing like I was the problem here. Their young mistakes happen, Michael. If you really love Ashley, you need to let her go. Let her go? I repeated. I could feel anger boiling up inside me. That's your solution? Your son sleeps with my fiancé and I'm supposed to just hand her over to him like it's no big deal? Don't talk like that. My mom snapped. This is a blessing, Michael. It's a sign. A sign of what? I interrupted her. That your precious son can't take responsibility for anything. Am I just supposed to keep rolling over and taking it? Mom's face turned stern. Kyle made a mistake, but he's doing the right thing now. He's stepping up, and we need to support him as a family. As a family? That phrase broke something in me. I realized in that moment that I wasn't part of their family, not really. I was just the backup kid, the one who did everything right but never mattered as much as Kyle. I looked back at Kyle. He still hadn't said a word, not even a fake apology. He couldn't even lift his head. You know what? I said, my voice shaking. Fine. You want to support him? You can. I'm done. I'm letting all of you go. My mom looked shocked. Michael, don't say things you don't mean. No, I mean it, I said. You've made your choice, it's him, it's always been him. I turned around and walked straight to my room. I could hear my mom following me, still trying to talk me down, but I didn't care. I grabbed a suitcase from my closet and started throwing everything into it. Clothes, laptop, books. My hands were shaking so hard that I dropped a few things, but I didn't stop. Michael, you're being rash, Mom said from the doorway. This is your family. I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I didn't care what she thought. No, you're his family. You stopped being mine a long time ago. She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't feel bad, not anymore. By the time I was done packing, my dad had shown up too. He stood next to my mom, his face set in that same disappointed expression he always gave me when I didn't fall in line. You're overreacting, he said. Overreacting? I repeated. Your son slept with my fiancé, and I'm overreacting? I pushed past them both, dragging my suitcase out to the car. Neither of them tried to stop me. They probably thought I'd cool off and come back, but I knew better. This was it. I drove back to campus that night. It was a 3-hour drive, and I spent the whole time in silence. I didn't even play music. When I got back to my dorm, I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The next morning, I changed my phone number. I deleted every single social media account and made new ones. I blocked my parents, Kyle, and Ashley. Every photo I had with her went into the trash. I didn't even look at them. I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, my friends noticed I was acting weird. They asked me about the wedding, and all I'd say was it's off. I don't want to talk about it. That was enough to shut them up. The only person I kept in contact with was Aunt Mary. She sent me a message a week later. I heard what happened. I'm with you, nephew. They'll regret this someday, trust me. At the time, I didn't care if they regretted it. I just wanted to disappear. The days after cutting my family off felt like floating in some strange limbo. I wasn't sad or angry. I wasn't much of anything. I just woke up, went through the motions of class, and stayed up late at night staring at my laptop screen until I was too tired to think. I didn't let myself process what happened because if I did, I'd feel like I'd break. I went full-on robot mode. Wake up, code class, eat something if I remembered, repeat. I stopped talking to most of my friends. People asked why I wasn't bringing Ashley around anymore or what happened to the wedding, and I'd just say it's done. I don't want to talk about it. I didn't owe anyone an explanation and didn't feel like telling them about the absolute dumpster fire that was my life. I threw myself into coding and schoolwork like a man possessed. It was the only thing I could control. I'd always been good at programming, but now it was all I had to focus on. I started staying in the computer lab late into the night building random projects and tweaking my own scripts just for the hell of it. If I wasn't working on school assignments, I was learning new languages or tinkering with cybersecurity software, anything to keep my mind busy. My professors started noticing how much time I was putting in. One of them, Professor Adams, who taught a cybersecurity elective, pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if I was interested in doing some research for a project he was working on. He didn't have funding to pay me but promised it would look good on my resume. I said yes without even thinking about it. I didn't care about the resume boost. I just needed something to do. Working with Professor Adams turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. He was a no-nonsense guy with a dry sense of humor but really knew his stuff. I spent every spare second in his office or lab learning about penetration testing, vulnerability scans, and encryption algorithms. For the first time in months, I felt like I was building something real, something that couldn't just be taken away from me. While burying myself in work, life back home fell apart. I didn't know about it at first because I wasn't talking to anyone, but then Aunt Mary started reaching out. Aunt Mary is my mom's older sister. She's always been the black sheep of the family. She never really got along with my mom but always liked me. I think she saw how my parents treated Kyle and couldn't stand it anyway. She was the only person I didn't block, and every now and then she'd send me a text or an email to check in. About 6 months after cutting everyone off, she sent me a message. Kyle flunked out of med school. Thought you should know. I stared at my phone for a long time after reading that. I don't know what I expected to feel, maybe satisfaction or vindication, but all I felt was numb. Of course he flunked out. He could barely handle high school biology, let alone med school. I put my phone down and went back to coding. Over the next few months Aunt Mary kept me updated. Kyle didn't tell my parents about his failing grades until he was already kicked out of school. By then he'd burned through most of the money my dad had saved for his tuition. My parents were furious at first but quickly shifted back into their usual routine of making excuses for him. My mom said Kyle was under too much pressure and needed time to figure himself out, while my dad blamed the school for being too harsh. The truth was that Kyle never worked for anything in his life, so when things got hard he just gave up. After dropping out, Kyle moved back home. He spent the first few months sitting around doing nothing while my parents coddled him. My mom made excuses for why he wasn't working. He's still processing everything, while my dad kept talking about second chances. Meanwhile, Ashley had given birth to a little girl. She was raising her on her own, mostly because Kyle couldn't be bothered to step up. He helped sometimes, but according to Aunt Mary that usually meant my mom nagging him until he spent an hour or two with his kid. Hearing all this didn't make me feel better. If anything, it just reinforced what I'd already known. My parents would always choose Kyle no matter how badly he screwed up. But while they were busy cleaning up his mess, I was building my own life. By the time I graduated, I had a job offer waiting for me from a startup interested in the cybersecurity software I'd helped develop with Professor Adams. They liked my work so much that they offered to let me join as a junior developer with equity in the company. I took the job and moved to a new city far away from everything I'd left behind. Those first few months at the startup were tough. I was working 12-hour days, living off instant ramen and crashing on a mattress on the floor of my apartment. But I didn't care. I was doing something that mattered. The software we were building had real potential and I was part of it. One night after a particularly long day, I got another message from Aunt Mary. Kyle works at Target now. Mom's worried about him. They don't know what to do. I read the message, then put my phone down and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't like I was surprised. Kyle had spent his entire life being told he was special, and now he was facing the reality that he wasn't. I knew it wasn't my problem, but it still left me feeling weird, not sad exactly, just tired. I didn't respond to Aunt Mary that night. I didn't know what to say. A year later, my startup took off. The software we built caught the attention of some investors, and suddenly we were growing faster than any of us had expected. I was promoted to lead developer, which came with a nice salary bump and enough money to move into a proper apartment for the first time in years. I felt like I was in control of my life. I thought about my family less and less. They weren't part of my world anymore, and I was okay with that. Aunt Mary still checked in from time to time, but I didn't ask about Kyle or my parents. I didn't want to know. Then, 4 years after I walked out of that house, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number when my phone rang, but something in my gut told me to answer. It wasn't a number I had saved, and I didn't get many random calls these days. Most people reached me through email or Slack. So when I picked up and heard my mom's voice on the other end, I froze. "Michael," she said, her voice cracked like she'd been crying for hours. "Michael, it's me. Please don't hang up." It took me a second to find my voice. "How did you get this number?" I hadn't spoken to her or anyone in my family for almost 4 years. I'd made damn sure they couldn't reach me. But apparently she'd found a way. "I got it from Aunt Mary," she admitted. "Please listen to me, we need your help. Things have been difficult." That word difficult felt like a gross understatement, but I didn't say anything. I just sat there gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I should have hung up right then, but I couldn't. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to hear her out. Maybe some stupid part of me was curious about what they wanted. "What's going on?" I asked flatly. My tone was colder than I intended, but I didn't care. Mom let out a shaky breath, and her words came tumbling out like she couldn't hold them back anymore. "We're in trouble, Michael. Your father's health isn't good. He's been to the hospital twice this year for his heart, and we've had to sell the house to cover Kyle's mistakes." "Kyle's mistakes?" I repeated. I knew I shouldn't have asked, but I couldn't stop myself. She hesitated for a moment, then blurted it all out. Apparently Kyle had borrowed $40,000 for some business opportunity that a friend pitched him. Mom didn't say what it was, probably because she didn't know or didn't want to admit how stupid it sounded, but it failed within a month, completely wiped out. When Kyle couldn't pay back the loan, my parents stepped in, dipping into their retirement savings to try and bail him out. That combined with some of Dad's medical bills forced them to sell the house. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, and of course Kyle moved with them. Where else would he go? "Michael, we don't have anything left," Mom said. Her voice was thin like she was trying to hold back sobs. "Kyle is trying. He's been looking for work." "But looking for work?" I interrupted, the anger bubbling to the surface. "Mom, Kyle is 24 years old. He's a grown man. Why are you still cleaning up his messes?" "Because we're his parents," she snapped, as if that explained everything. Then she softened again. "Michael, we need you. We need your help." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "Why should I help you?" I asked. "You made it very clear 4 years ago where I stood in this family." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "We didn't know what to do back then. Kyle made a mistake, but he's trying now." "Trying? You mean he's still living off you?" I said, "like he always has." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. "Please, Michael," she said finally, "your father's health is bad and I don't know what we'll do. We have nothing left." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For a second, I imagined what they must look like now. Dad gray and hunched over staring out the window of some cramped apartment. Mom pacing the room wringing her hands. Kyle sitting on the couch with his head down, just like that night 4 years ago. It was almost too easy to picture, but I didn't feel bad for them, not really. I felt tired, like this was the natural conclusion to the choices they'd made. You chose him, I said quietly. You had a choice and you chose Kyle, now you're living with it. Michael, I cut her off, I have nothing to give you, goodbye. Mom, I hung up the phone before she could say another word. My hands were shaking as I set it down on the kitchen table. I stared at it for a long time, half expecting her to call back, but she didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark replaying the conversation in my head over and over. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself they were just reaping what they'd sown, but no matter how many times I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake this feeling of emptiness. It wasn't guilt, I didn't feel sorry for them, but hearing my mom's voice, hearing how desperate she sounded, stirred something in me that I didn't want to deal with. The next day, I called Aunt Mary. Figured you'd call me after that, she said. I could hear her sipping coffee on the other end of the line. Your mom said she was going to reach out. She got my number from you? I asked, trying to sound annoyed but failing. Relax, kid, Aunt Mary said. I didn't give it to her. She must have dug it up some other way. You know your mom, she doesn't give up easily. I sighed and rubbed my face. How bad is it, Aunt Mary? Really? She let out a slow breath. It's bad, Michael. Your dad's heart isn't what it used to be, and they're flat broke. Kyle, well, you know Kyle, he's still waiting for life to hand him something on a silver platter. Your parents are barely scraping by, and your mom doesn't know how to deal with any of it. She shouldn't have to deal with it, I said bitterly. Kyle should. Yeah, well, Aunt Mary said, some people never grow up. We talked for a little while longer, and when I hung up, I felt drained. Aunt Mary never sugarcoated anything, and I appreciated that, but hearing about the mess my parents had gotten themselves into just made me feel more distant from them. I'd spent the last 4 years building a life for myself, a life they had nothing to do with, and now they wanted me to come back and fix everything? I wasn't going to do it, I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work even harder than before. My company was growing and we were rolling out a big update to our software, so I had plenty to keep me distracted. I told myself I was fine, my parents weren't my responsibility, and I didn't owe them anything, but late at night when the apartment was quiet and my mind had nowhere to go, I kept hearing my mom's voice, we need your help. It didn't take long for Aunt Mary to fill in the gaps my mom hadn't told me. After that phone call, I'd text her every now and then, not because I wanted to hear about them, but because curiosity has a funny way of gnawing at you when you try to ignore it. I guess I wanted to know how bad things had gotten, like peeking at a car wreck on the side of the road. A week after the call, Aunt Mary sent me an email. Thought you should know your parents sold their car. Kyle needed a new investment opportunity. God knows what for, she continued. Your mom cried for hours after they let it go. I read that line over my morning coffee and shook my head. I shouldn't have been surprised. Selling their car, that sounded like the kind of thing my parents would do. Bending over backward to enable Kyle for the millionth time. The golden child could do no wrong, even when he was running them into the ground. Aunt Mary told me more as the weeks passed. Kyle had tried to jump into another business venture. Apparently some old friend of his convinced him that he could make thousands selling refurbished electronics online. It didn't pan out, of course. It didn't. Kyle didn't know the first thing about running a business, and within a month the whole thing tanked. Not before he begged my parents to help him invest in it though. This time they didn't have money to bail him out, not after selling their car and already losing their house. Aunt Mary told me Kyle threw a tantrum when they said no, like a kid who'd been denied candy at the store. My mom though? She still tried to console him, saying, we'll figure it out, sweetie, don't worry. It would have been almost funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. My company was in its best year yet. The software we developed was getting a lot of attention, and I was starting to travel to meet with investors and business partners. I bought a new car, upgraded to a bigger apartment. My life was finally starting to feel like my life, something I'd built from the ground up without my family's involvement or approval. I didn't tell anyone at work about my family. To them, I was just another guy who'd worked hard and gotten lucky, and maybe that's what I was. One day, about 3 months after that phone call, Aunt Mary sent me another email. This one hit harder than the others. Your dad had another hospital visit, hard again. He's stable, but it scared your mom half to death. She won't say it out loud, but I think she knows she's out of options. About a month later, Aunt Mary called. It wasn't like her to call. She usually just sent texts or emails, so I knew something was wrong. I answered on the second ring. Hey, Aunt Mary, I said. What's up? She sighed on the other end. Your parents are in worse shape than I thought. What now? I asked. Your mom lost her job, she said. They're living off scraps at this point. Your dad can't work anymore because of his health. And Kyle, well, you know Kyle. He's still home, unemployed, sitting on his ass while they scrape together rent money. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? Michael, Aunt Mary said after a pause, they're desperate. Your mom won't admit it to me, but I can tell. She keeps asking if I've talked to you, dropping little hints. I think she's hoping you'll come riding in to save the day. They're not my problem, I said quietly. I know, Aunt Mary replied, but she doesn't see it that way. We sat in silence for a few seconds before she added, I'm not telling you this to guilt you, Michael. I just thought you should know. Thanks for letting me know, I said. Are you doing good for yourself? She added. Don't let them pull you back into their mess. I won't, I said, and I meant it. It was around this time that I got curious enough to look Kyle up online. I hadn't checked on him in years, blocked accounts, no mutual friends, nothing. But I was curious. I opened a private browser and typed his name into Facebook. His profile was still public. His last post was from a few weeks ago, a photo of him sitting on my parents' couch, wearing sweatpants and holding a video game controller. The caption read, taking it easy, life's short, you know? The comments made me cringe. His old friends were still hyping him up. You deserve a break, man. You'll get there soon, bro. I closed the tab, disgusted. How could he still have people cheering him on when he'd done nothing with his life? Meanwhile, my parents were sacrificing everything just to keep him afloat. I thought about sending Aunt Mary a screenshot, but I didn't, there was no point. A few months later, the company I worked for closed a major deal. The payout I received as part of my equity share was enough to set me up for years. I celebrated with some coworkers, had a nice dinner, and then went home to my quiet apartment. That night, I sat on my couch thinking about how far I'd come. I had everything I'd worked for: freedom, stability, a career I was proud of. But no matter how far I got, part of me still carried the weight of my family. I didn't miss them exactly, I missed the idea of a family that would have been proud of me, supported me, and chosen me when it mattered, but that wasn't the family I had. That night, I wrote Aunt Mary a message: "Thanks for everything you've done for me these past few years. I don't know where I'd be without your support. I hope you're doing okay, let me know if you ever need anything." She replied almost immediately: "Proud of you, Michael. Keep building your life. I'll be okay." At some point, you have to stop looking back, you have to let go of the idea that things could have been different. My parents made their choices, Kyle made his, and I made mine. I didn't owe them anything. It had been almost 5 years since I'd walked away from my family, but sometimes it still felt like yesterday: the mess, the betrayal, the night I packed my things and left. Those memories stuck with me not because I hadn't healed but because those moments shaped who I became. By now my life looked nothing like it had back then. My company had grown far beyond what I'd ever imagined. We weren't a scrappy startup anymore, we were a real player in cybersecurity. I was in a position where I could do whatever I wanted with my time, travel when I felt like it, invest in new projects, and work on ideas I cared about. My house, a sleek quiet space I'd bought a year ago, felt like a sanctuary. I didn't need much to be happy, peace and stability were enough. But no matter how good my life got, there were still moments when my past tried to catch up with me. One of those moments came on a random Thursday evening. I was finishing up work for the day when I got a message request on Facebook. I didn't use Facebook much anymore but checked out of habit. The message was from Kyle. I stared at the screen for a long time debating whether I even wanted to open it. Part of me said to ignore it, just delete it and move on, but curiosity got the better of me and I clicked on it. His message was short: "Hey. I know you probably don't want to hear from me but I'm trying to fix things. I messed up and I'm sorry for everything. Mom and Dad aren't doing well, just thought you should know." I stared at the words for a long time. I'm sorry for everything. That's what he said after all these years, that's what he led with, an apology that was probably 5 years too late. I didn't reply, I couldn't. That night, I lay in bed thinking about my brother. Kyle was always the person I resented most, not because of what he did with Ashley but because of everything else: the way my parents raised him, the way they handed him everything on a silver platter, the way he took without ever giving anything back. It wasn't just Kyle who let me down, it was my parents too. They built him into the person he became and now they were paying for it, but that wasn't my problem anymore. The next morning Aunt Mary called. She didn't usually call unless it was serious, so I answered right away. "Michael, it's your dad," she said, her voice softer than usual, like she was bracing herself for my reaction. "He had another heart episode. It's bad this time, they don't think he's going to recover." I sat down at my kitchen table as the words sank in. I didn't know what to say. "Your mom's a mess," Aunt Mary continued. "She's not handling it well, and Kyle, well, you know Kyle." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "What does she want me to do?" "She hasn't said anything," Aunt Mary replied, "but you know her, I think she's hoping you'll show up." For a moment, I thought about it. I thought about going back, sitting at my dad's bedside, seeing my mom, seeing Kyle. Maybe they'd all look at me differently this time. Maybe they'd regret how they treated me, but then realize that wasn't what I wanted. I wasn't looking for closure, I wasn't looking for them to apologize. I'd made my peace a long time ago. "I'm sorry to hear about Dad," I said finally, "but I'm not coming back, Aunt Mary, I can't." She didn't try to argue with me. "I figured as much," she said. "You've done what you needed to do, Michael, don't feel guilty for it." "I don't," I replied, and it was the truth. My father passed away a week later. Aunt Mary sent me an email to let me know. She told me there was a small funeral, mostly family and a handful of neighbors. Kyle was there, of course, standing next to my mom like nothing had changed. I didn't go. I thought about it but in the end decided that showing up would do more harm than good. I had nothing to say to them and didn't want to pretend otherwise. My father was gone and whatever I could have said to him had been left unsaid years ago. Instead, spent that day working in my office finishing a new project I'd been chipping away at. I didn't tell anyone what had happened to my coworkers. It was just another day, and honestly, I liked it that way. A few months later, I heard from Aunt Mary again. This time it was about my mom. "She's not doing great, Michael," she told me over the phone. "Losing your dad hit her hard, and Kyle, well, Kyle is still Kyle, he's living with her but he's not helping." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. "And what does she want me to do?" "She hasn't asked for anything," Aunt Mary said quickly. "I'm just telling you because I thought you should know. You don't owe her anything, Michael, you've already given enough." I appreciated that about Aunt Mary. She never tried to guilt me or push me to do something I didn't want to do. She just told me the truth and let me decide what to do with it. "I'll think about it," I said, even though I'd already known what my answer was going to be. In the end, I never reached out to my mom. I thought about it a few times, especially after Aunt Mary's updates, but every time remembered how things had been. I remembered how I'd felt sitting in that living room while my parents defended Kyle. I remembered how they looked at me like I'd been the problem. Some people say family is everything, but I don't believe that. Family is only everything if they treat you like you matter. If they don't, then you're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to put yourself first. That's what I'd done. Years later, I was still building my life, still moving forward. I had a home, a career, and friends who felt more like family than my blood ever had. I didn't hate my parents or Kyle anymore. I didn't feel angry or bitter. If anything, I felt free. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from winning, it comes from walking away.